So first and foremost is the basics, which is what percentage of the company is going to be held by the investor at the end of putting that investment. So there's something called pre-money valuation, which is the value of the company before any money has been put into the company, and something called post-money valuation, which is once you have put that money in, it adds directly to the pre-money valuation. It's called the post-money valuation. So an example, if suppose somebody is putting $1 million into the company, then if the pre-money valuation is $2 million, then after $1 million has been put, it becomes $3 million is the total valuation of the company. And the investor has got one out of those 3 million because they put that $1 million in equity. Anyway, this is like the most basic part. But the thing which we, as an investor, you need to be really aware of, as a founder, you need to really be aware of, is some specific things in the term sheet. And I'll just touch upon a few of them. The first one is something called liquidation preference. And liquidation preference refers to the fact that when there is an exit for the company, which is when money is being returned to the shareholders, which could happen when the company is sold or the company goes IPO, right? Those are the two events. Then the money is returned back to the owners of the company. Liquidation preference means that that money is first returned to the investors. So suppose the company, for the sake of example, is 50% held by the employees and 50% held by the investors, and the investors have put in, say, $5 million into the company, and the company is sold at that time. And the company is sold for, say, $8 million. Now you're in a situation where if you just take 50-50, because both investors and employees own 50% each of them should get $4 million. But that's not the case. The first $5 million will go back to the investor, which is they become whole, and then the employees actually start participating in the proceeds. So this is something called liquidation preference. And what it really means, what the logic behind it, and it's important to understand the rationale here, then all the terms become simpler. It is like somebody has given the entrepreneur money, and what they are saying is, we at least want to make our money back before you start taking money out, because we have to go ahead and return the money back to our own investors in the fund. So that is the logic behind liquidation preference. But what I talked about right now is called 1x liquidation preference or 1 times liquidation preference. In some cases, investors might have something called 2 times liquidation preference. And what that really means is that if you have put in 5 million, then the first 10 million goes back to the investors before the entrepreneurs participate in it. Now you as an entrepreneur might say, hey, that's unfair, that doesn't sound right. Well, it really depends, because it depends on how risky, what the level of risk the investor is taking, and what is the actual success criteria for this company. And there are cases when there could be even 3x liquidation preferences. So just be aware of that, what liquidation preference means, and it is usually a point of negotiation. And 1x liquidation preference is the base case, and everyone would have that. But you can even have 1.5, 2, or 3x liquidation preferences. That's liquidation preference. And what this means is that while the ownership stake in the company between entrepreneurs and investors could be anything, let's say again 50-50 to go back to the same example, there are certain clauses where a simple majority is not sufficient. And what the investors say is, we want what are called blocking rights. And this is typically a case where there is a sale of the company in question. So what the investors typically will say is, if the company is going to be sold, then it needs to have an affirmative assent, like they have to say yes from an investor standpoint. Which means that you might have as an entrepreneur given 70 or 80% of the company, but you will not be able to sell the company if the 20 or 30% of the investors actually say yes. It's an important point, and what happens is that entrepreneurs frequently get surprised by this at the time of exit. Now, what is the logic behind it? The logic behind this is that an exit event, in the case of a sale of a company, directly impacts the return for the investors. And what they don't want to do is have an exit very early, for example, where they haven't seen sufficient returns and where they have a fundamental disagreement with the entrepreneur. And what they expect is to have that right to block that sale. So this is a blocking right. There are a couple of other blocking rights which can also be there, But this probably is the one which is mostly there. This is also common to have this particular blocking right. But it's important for entrepreneurs to go, one, look for this particular clause in the term sheet, and second, be comfortable with it. If not, you can always discuss and negotiate it. The third thing is what happens in a future round. So in a future round, the current investor, and it really depends on the funds, would want some kind of rights. And these are called pro rata rights. They might say, hey, look, we have 20% of the company at the end of this round, we own that. And we want to take 20% of the next round as well. That is, we are actually already placing, reserving some space for ourselves in the next round. So the next round is a $10 million raise, 20%, which is $2 million, is something which we have a right, but not the obligation to invest in. Usually it's a fine thing, it's a normal thing to actually have that kind of pro rata rights. It also shows that the investor is committed to being with the company in the journey ahead. But just important to realize what it really means. There are some other rights which can sometimes creep in, which the entrepreneur should really be careful about, and these are called rights of first refusal, or ROFR, ROFR, rights of first refusal. And what that really means is that this investor or a strategic fund or a strategic investor, typically happens in the strategic case, has a right to first actually make or break an offer. And what that means is right of first refusal means if you actually go ahead and get in the following round an investment from an investor, the person who has the right of first refusal can go ahead and trump that offer and make an offer on top of it. So what this means is that the person who holds the right of first refusal always has the right to invest in this company after taking in all the competing bids out there. So in one sense, they have a big benefit that they can see what the other people are coming in at, and then they can go ahead and decide to either participate or not. And the reason this thing, it might seem benign, but it is bad, is that the other investors are quite aware of what this means, and they will never actually even approach the company, because they will say that the person who has the right of first refusal really has an unfair advantage in this entire transaction, and they'll come ahead and undo all the good work that we might be doing. So you will actually not have companies wishing to investors wishing to participate in a company round. So really watch out for that, and typically good term sheets will not have a right of first refusal associated with it. So those are the things to watch out for. One thing which entrepreneurs typically ask for is that what is this dilution thing? And like, am I really getting diluted? It's like I have a highly concentrated share of this company and it's getting, somebody's pouring water on it. But that really is, so dilution has got a negative connotation. It really shouldn't be so. What dilution means is that suppose an entrepreneur has 100% of the company, and before they go ahead and take a round of investment, if an investor comes in and now has 30% of the company after they put in certain money, then the entrepreneur only has 70% of the company, and this is called 30% dilution. And this occurs in each round, because in a future round, when a new investor comes, let's say Series B or C or what have you, and they own 30% of the company now, so this 70% gets again reduced further by another 30%, and so forth. So each round results in the percentage holding of the entrepreneur coming down, and this is understandable since the investor is holding, you're actually taking out more slices of this pie and handing it over to investors. But the reason why it is not a bad thing is that when the company is doing well, the valuation of the company is growing. So at each stage, so while the investor, the founder might own 100% of a company which is worth nothing or a small amount, after the investment they own 70% of something which is actually valued at a much higher scale, and then even a much higher scale, and so on and so forth. So the value of the shares which are held by the investors are actually worth more usually in each subsequent round, just that the percentage is less. Put it another way, it's like a pizza which is growing in size, and you might initially have 100% of that personal pizza, but later on you have like 3 slices of a 5-slice pizza, but they are like really big slices, and so totally you're actually having a much larger share of it. It's important to understand this particular aspect, because often I hear entrepreneurs saying, oh, I only have X% of the company. And well, it really is more important to ask, you have X% of what? Like, what is the valuation of the company? What are the prospects of the company? So it's much better to actually have a smaller portion of a company which has got high quality investors and high quality prospects than 80 or 90% of a company which is not going anywhere. So be very aware of this particular aspect.